You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 5th of July 2013. Boris Johnson open to fracking beneath London to keep lights on. Victory for residents after bid to turn village green into a mosque. Lasers target military aircraft bringing home wounded troops. Marine Le Pen stripped of parliamentary immunity. Portugal on brink of collapse. Geert Wilders spreads his European wings. Nick on Marine Le Pen's parliamentary immunity and the BNP's 2012 accounts. Egypt outshines Syria as army topples Morsi. Some stories from the home of Merlin. And finally, keys and a warning from the police. UK news. Boris Johnson open to fracking beneath London to keep lights on. London Mayor Boris Johnson said he's open to fracking for gas under the UK capital to meet the city's demand for energy. The headroom between energy supply and demand will drop to just 2% in 2 years, which will force some industries not to operate at peak times, Johnson said in a letter published in the Times newspaper today. If reserves of shale can be exploited in London, we should leave no stone unturned or unfracked in the cause of keeping the lights on. It's time for maximum boldness in energy supply, Johnson wrote. The UK government said June 27th that shale gas fields in northern England are potentially big enough to meet demand for 47 years. The countryside south of Britain's biggest city may hold 700 million barrels of recoverable shale oil, according to the US Energy Information Administration. World at 8 states. We have covered fracking last week in World at 8, and I despair as Boris the Loris just ain't the brightest bulb on the tree. I sense greed at work here and I just hope someone can stop him in time. Victory for residents after bid to turn village green into a mosque. A strip of grass in an inner city area has been declared a village green in a victory for campaigners who fought to stop it being turned into a mosque car park. The plot, sold to an Islamic group for £1, has now been saved by campaigners who wanted it to remain an open space. The issue divided the community for 2 years, but the council has now accepted a public inquiry ruling that grants the land village green status. The legal move means it can no longer be concreted and must stay an open space. Instead, there are plans to turn the plot in Aston, Birmingham into a £60,000 community garden. City councillor Tony Kennedy, who supported the fight to save the strip of grass, said every community should have a village green. It is in the finest traditions of England. It is in the midst of a dense housing area and residents need places like this to escape. The plot is still owned by the Masjid Faizul Islam Mosque, but they no longer have permission to develop it. World at 8 says, thank God these Muslims have not been allowed to ride roughshod over this community. When will they understand they are not in their own country, they are merely visitors, and unwelcome ones at that. Lasers target military aircraft bringing home wounded troops. Laser attacks on aircraft in Birmingham are rising and shocking figures show more than 220 laser attacks in the region with airlines and police helicopters targeted. Thugs are using powerful lasers to target airliners, police helicopters and even military transporters, bringing wounded troops into Birmingham. There have been more than 220 separate laser attacks reported in the West Midlands in the last 2 years, according to alarming new figures from the Civil Aviation Authority. The worrying statistics obtained under the Freedom of Information Act reveal one attack on a police helicopter last year came from the open window of a mosque in Small Heath. Laser beams were also spotted coming from bedroom windows, hotels, moving cars and even an unnamed Midlands sports stadium as planes came into land at Birmingham. Chillingly, there have also been 3 separate attacks against military aircraft bringing in injured troops for treatment into Birmingham. The first was on May 4, 2011 when a plane was targeted by a green laser as it made its final approach to the airport. The second attack was on September 15th that year when another military aircraft was flying at 4,000 feet west of the M6 near Cannock. 2 weeks later there was a third incident when a plane flying at 2,000 feet was targeted by a laser as it came into land. In some of the 220 incidents, pilots have been targeted by multiple lasers with the cockpit lit up with red, blue and green lights. The British Airline Pilots Association BALPA has warned that targeting lasers on aircraft is like playing Russian roulette with the lives of the passengers and has called for prison sentences for those responsible. Cases of laser attacks across the UK have jumped from 3 in 2004 to more than 1,500 last year. World Today states, if it's found that the attacks stem from Islamic jihadists, then the penalty must be death, not a slap on the wrist. This is guerrilla warfare and should be treated as such. European news. Marine Le Pen stripped of parliamentary immunity. French Front National leader Marine Le Pen has been stripped of her European parliamentary immunity and may now face charges in French courts of racism over comments she made comparing Muslims praying on streets to Nazi occupation during World War II. Parliamentarians voted on Tuesday to ratify the decision as recommended by a judicial committee so that Le Pen, who leads the French National Front Party, could defend herself against a charge of inciting racial hatred brought by French prosecutors in 2011. Le Pen, who was present for the vote, said she stood behind her comments and looked forward to defending them in front of a judge. In her speech made in 2010 in Lyon and broadcast in France, Le Pen said that more and more burqas were being seen in France. After that came prayers in the streets. I'm sorry, but some people are very fond of talking about the Second World War and about the occupation. So let's talk about occupation, because that is what is happening here. There are no tanks, no soldiers, but it is still an occupation, and it weighs on people. If found guilty of inciting racial hatred, she would face a maximum penalty of 1 year in prison and $60,000 in fines. World Today comments, poor Marine, she's facing the same bigotry that our Nick Griffin faced, and in fact all opposers of the left face, sheer unadulterated bigotry and undeserved hatred. But the people will have the last word. Portugal on the brink of collapse. Portugal's financial markets nosedived today amid fears that repayments on its £64 billion bailout would soon become unsustainable as the government looks set to collapse following a spat over the country's austerity programme. Share prices dropped by around 6% in early trading, alarming investors and reigniting concerns that the Eurozone's strategy for dealing with the financial crisis is flawed. The market dip came as Portuguese Prime Minister Pedro Passos Coelho defied calls to resign last night after the resignations of key ministers in a spat over austerity. Portugal is locked into a programme of tough budget cuts demanded by its fellow Euro countries, the European Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund, in return for a €78 billion, £66 billion bailout 2 years ago. Geert Wilders spreads his wings. As the Irish Times reports, latest opinion polls show the Freedom Party would become biggest in the Dutch Parliament if election held tomorrow, a Boost leader Geert Wilders puts down to fury over austerity. He's called for a series of mass demonstrations in the Netherlands and is working to cement relations with Swedish and Italian nationalist parties, as well as Belgium's Vlaams Belang and the Front National in France. I think we should talk to other parties which are critical of Europe to see if we can work together, Wilders said. Criticism by other Freedom Party supporters of some of the party's opposition to gay rights and gay marriage are understandable but not relevant to the campaign against European control and mass immigration, he said. These are not reasons not to work together. I now hand you over to Nick Griffin MEP, and today it is Nick talking on Marine Le Pen's parliamentary immunity and the BNP's 2012 accounts.
What have I got for you this week? A bit of Marine Le Pen, a beer recommendation, and a couple of snippets more BNP good news. First though, an apology. I recorded last Friday's programme in a tearing hurry because I was busy helping with the setup of our officials and activists training weekend. The weather wasn't brilliant, it was a near gale on Sunday, but it blew away nothing except a few mental cobwebs. It was a very enjoyable and successful event, with the main emphasis being on ways to increase voter turnout in next year's European elections. Getting people who agree with us registered to vote and encouraging them to get postal votes is absolutely crucial. All the signs are that the growth in public cynicism about the political process is continuing apace. The ultra-low turnout that's the likely result makes even quite small numbers of postal votes potentially decisive, because statistically, someone with a postal ballot is a staggering 8 times more likely to vote than someone who hasn't got one. On top of that, there's also increasing voter volatility out there. UKIP, for example, have just lost a seat they only won in May in Stourport, West Midlands. That may not be a record turnaround, but it surely can't be far off. But welcome though it is to see the first signs of people waking up to the phoniness of the Farage mirage, what we all want even more, of course, is to see solid evidence of the potential for the electoral revival of the BNP, which is exactly what is provided by a remarkable statistic delivered at the weekend event. During one of the sessions on voter and postal vote registration, we heard how one lone activist, just testing this technique in a perfectly ordinary ward in Lancashire, brought home 67 postal vote applications with fewer than 5 hours' work over 2 light evening sessions of door knocking and explaining what we were about. To give you an idea of just how significant a leap forward this is, let me point out that in our previous electoral peak in 2008, we were 50 votes or fewer off winning in over 200 seats. With an average 80% postal voter turnout, David's 67 postal votes would have done the trick in each and every one of them. Of course, with UKIP still benefiting from the BBC's relentless promotion of Nigel Farage, we need to get a lot more than 67 registrations per seat to get back to winning. A more realistic figure in a typical district council seat is something like 700. Yet the amazing thing is that, in a good area like David's, it won't take much more than 50 hours to reach that target. 50 hours spread out over 10 months for those who start straight away. Just 5 hours door knocking a month for the prize of being paid to be a BNP super community activist for 4 of the most significant years of your life. What's not to like? Believe me, I've seen quiet, shy, unassuming chaps and chapesses growing into the role and becoming champions of their community and terrors to the ruling cartel in the council chamber. Getting elected as BNP councillors changes people's lives for the better, candidates as well as the voters. And for those who grasp the opportunity presented by these new tactics, the goal is once again within reach. It's just a question of numbers, of doors knocked, hands shaken, forms filled in, seats won. It's not just about us, it's about reinvigorating the entire democratic process and involving ordinary people in the decisions that affect us all. That's why we're going to be rolling out a whole series of more training events over the summer. The first one was, after all, called at rather short notice to take advantage of several key people all being available at the same time. So apologies if you wanted to come, but just couldn't make it, and don't worry, you'll get another chance, probably in a more convenient location very shortly. I can't absolutely guarantee that you'll have as much fun as we all did last weekend. In addition to some really great constructive training, discussions and lectures, there was a great atmosphere of comradeship, especially on Saturday evening. This started with a full hog roast, followed by a fiendish British history quiz, a barrel of real ale station bitter from the microbrewery up the road in Oswestry, for those in traditional good taste, and with a healthy disdain for corporate chemical fizz. By the way, Oswestry was the place my predecessor, John Tyndall, did his national service training, and where my eldest daughter, the one with the toddler who goes leafleting, gained over 20% of the vote in the recent council elections. Jennifer and Angus had very sensibly called it a night well before the hardy 24 of us left in the marquee by the end of the evening started singing. We began with a couple of Dubliners tracks by way of karaoke, but the number of traditional songs with good choruses available at present in that way is all too limited. So, after a bit, it turned into an impromptu, solo, a cappella concert by me, with a bit of help in particular from Rudyard Kipling, who did write some exceedingly good ballads, including Gunga Din. I've not got a great voice. I did that for those of you who just muttered, you can say that again. But I do have a fair memory for songs, and it went down so well that I'm now discussing with one of our activists, who's nearly finished building a full-scale studio in his garage, the idea of recording a compilation of folk songs with particularly good choruses. Not as a musical project, but as a living exercise in cultural resistance, and by way of getting more of our people to experience and enjoy the ancient, and at present nearly lost, joy and power of singing together with other members of one's own tribe. Whether we'll be able to set aside the time required to complete the project is, of course, another matter, because I suspect it's going to be a busy and eventful summer. We had one event in Parliament this week. A vote was held on a proposal to lift the immunity from prosecution of the Front National's Marine Le Pen. Her crime? Thought crime. Or, more properly, saying what millions think crime. Predictably, while the BBC reported that Madame Le Pen is accused of incitement to hatred, they didn't see fit to tell us what she actually said, so that we could make our own judgment on whether it was hate or common sense. As is so often the case these days, it was Russia Today that told astute British TV viewers the truth, So here, thanks to RT, is what she said. Quote, France is seeing more and more veils and burqas. After that came praying on the streets. I'm sorry, but some people are very fond of talking about the World War and the occupation. So let's talk about the occupation, because that's what's happening here. There are no tanks or soldiers, but it's still an occupation, and it weighs on people. Unquote. Made up your mind? Yes, I thought so. And, equally predictably, so did the massed ranks of Red Front, Liberal cowardice and Conservative reaction on the parliamentary comfy chairs. No benches for the Euro elite. Devoted to freedom of speech throughout the world, they draw the line at Saudi Arabia. When, of course, you have that much money, you can buy enough political clout to torture as many dissidents as you want. And, of course, they draw the line at Europe. No free speech for Europeans. So Marine was stripped of her immunity and now faces prosecution in France with a penalty of up to a year in prison. Which I'm sure must suit her down to the ground, because such petty persecution, bravely borne, is exactly what she needs to set her so far apart from the crooks who failed France so badly and whose time is nearly up. Having voted to deny freedom of speech for those who represent the silent but now stirring majority in the captive nations of Europe, the leftist bullies, hypocrite liberals and craven conservatives then went on the next day to vote overwhelmingly in favour of a motion condemning what is alleged to be suppression of free speech in Hungary. My alliance colleague Dimitar Stoyanov rose and crossed his arms above his head. In Strasbourg, this doesn't mean that an MEP is a fan of Pink Floyd's The Wall, but that they wish to have their microphone switched on so they can make a point of order. This is, of course, an automatic right, unless you're part of the nationalist minority, and therefore a second-class citizen. We have a status somewhere between invisible and that of Negroes in the deep south, or perhaps of Cape Collards in old South Africa. We're not as lowly as the Turkish women who clean the toilets in the parliament. They're not even allowed into the parliamentary debating chamber. But we are second-class citizens, and so Dimitar stood, arms raised, and then clapping to draw attention, without anyone taking any notice. Herr President kept looking to his colleagues to the left. Several other of us Kafirs clapped, whistled, or shouted, "Point of order." I joined in. "We know this is an apartheid state, but there's a point of order over here." It got some appreciative noises from the nationalists, a few titters from the less cowardly conservatives, and tut-tuts from the leftists. But Herr President kept his microphone on and Dimitar's off, so we were steamrolled onto the votes on the next block of platitudes, PC dribble, and tax-gobbling, business-wrecking red tape. I wanted, the young Bulgarian patriot told me afterwards, to point out the hypocrisy in voting for free speech in Hungary just a day after voting for the prosecution of a dissident right here. Which, of course, is exactly why Herr President ignored the rules. Freedom of speech, you see, is sacrosanct, unless he has something to say with which the liberal elite disagree and find upsetting. So I'll finish this broadcast with something that our own liberal ruling elite will also find upsetting. The British National Party's 2012 accounts were delivered early again to the Electoral Commission last week. They show, for the second time running, a healthy operating surplus for the Central Party, which is remarkable considering we funded the London Assembly election to the tune of over £90,000 and repaid the last £64,000 that had been borrowed from the regions and branches in the dark years before I appointed Clive Jefferson to sort out Treasury. Old hands will recall that last year we were delighted to announce that the independent firm of chartered accountants who carry out the audit to blue-chip company standards had signed them off without any reservations. A complete bill of clean financial health with just a small list of recommendations for absolute best practice in terms of the audit trail in the future. Well, this year we went one better. Not only did we again get a full bill of financial health and transparency, but in addition, the auditors didn't feel the need to make a single recommendation for improvement. It doesn't get better than that. So if you happen to see Clive Jefferson, our Treasurer, who's still on crutches following a series of operations and procedures to lengthen a leg smashed almost beyond repair in a car accident some years ago, shake his hand and thank him, because he saved this party, and with it all our hopes and dreams for better times for our country and our people.
Thank you, Nick. As ever, highly informative. World news. Egypt outshines Syria as army topples Morsi. Egyptian President Morsi removed by Egyptian army as many Egyptians blame Obama administration for Morsi's election actions over the past year. It's worthy to note the Egyptian army and police allowed almost 100 women to be sexually assaulted in the 4 days of protest that led to Morsi's oust. The Egyptian army has shut down the Egyptian offices for Al Jazeera and arrested many of its presenters. The Egyptian army opened fire Friday morning at a demonstration outside the building where deposed Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi is reportedly being held, witnesses said. At least one person has been reported dead. World Date says, "Poor Egypt. Let's hope the pyramids and ancient stones of Egypt survive. I don't care much for the people." Thought for the day. Stories from the land of Merlin. I promised you a different Friday thought and I'm keeping that promise. We go to Cornwall, that distant and mysterious land as it once was known, which lies within English soil but is in truth anything but English. Cornwall is thought to be the original home of Merlin in the times of King Arthur Pendragon, and as the saying goes, by tray, pole and pen, you shall know the Cornish men. Surrounded on 3 sides by the sea, Cornwall is almost completely isolated by the River Tamar, creating an easily defended area which has attracted settlers since earliest times. Traces of these prehistoric peoples abound and have given rise to many legends. Dolmens and quoits, great stone circles and avenues, dating from about 3000 BC, were awesome things to the later Cornish. Constructed of granite boulders which seemed beyond the powers of mortal man to shift, they were instead believed to be the work of giants. Or perhaps they were men and maidens forever frozen in the circle for the sin of dancing on a Sunday. The Celts, from whom many of the modern Cornish are descended, crossed from Europe in increasing numbers during the 500 years preceding the birth of Christ. Successive invaders, Romans, Angles and Saxons, drove them into remote parts of the country. To Cornwall they brought their tales of gods and heroes, giants and fairies. These legends became interwoven with stories of the coming of Christianity. Many tales of the saints, that of St. Just for example, said to have stolen a golden cup from St. Kevin, show remarked pagan characteristics. St. Kevin threw enormous boulders at a thief, which, because no one was able to move them again, lie where they fell to this day. Very similar stories are told of the Cornish giants. Holy wells and stones credited with the ability to cure disease or to promote fertility in women are found all over Cornwall. Though many of them now bear saints' names, there is little doubt that their supposed miraculous powers long predate Christianity. The Celtic Church frequently ascribed the legendary deeds of the old gods to its own missionaries, several of whom came from Ireland and Wales. There is a story of the giant and the missionary. Another story tells of the mighty Bolster who fell deeply in love with St. Agnes, a beautiful and virtuous missionary. The giant followed her, incessantly proclaiming his love, but St. Agnes would only lecture him for his impropriety, for he was a married man. At last the saint decided to rid herself of him. She asked him to prove his love by filling a hole in the ground at Chapel Porth with his blood. Bolster, convinced it would take little blood to fill such a small hole, plunged his knife into a vein and held his arm over the hole. Blood gushed for hours, but the hole was not filled. The cunning saint knew that the cavity opened out into the sea, and at last the giant collapsed and died. The hole remains at Chapel Porth to verify the legend, and a red stain marks where Bolster's blood once flowed down the rocks. And now we go to Bodmin Moor. Bodmin, the name means House of the Monks, and until the dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII, Bodmin was mainly an ecclesiastical town. The original monastery, a few traces of which remain, was found in the 6th century by St. Petroc, a Celtic missionary from Wales. In the crypt of St. Petroc's church lies an ivory casket, thought to have contained the saint's bones. During the reign of Henry XI, these were stolen by a Breton priest and taken to St. Meen Abbey in Brittany. Henry, who was overlord of Brittany, forced the Bretons to return the casket and its contents to Bodmin. I've stayed in Helston. It's a charming place, and according to one legend, the devil was flying across Cornwall carrying a boulder to block the entrance to hell when he was challenged by St. Michael. In the ensuing battle, the devil dropped the rock, and the place where it fell became known as Hell's Stone or Helston. It's said that a large rock built into the wall of the Angel Hotel in Coinager Hall Street is this very stone. To celebrate St. Michael's victory over the devil, the inhabitants danced through the streets and thereby originated the famous furry dance, which still takes place on the nearest Saturday to the feast day of the town's patron saint, St Michael the Archangel, May the 8th. The name of the dance is derived either from the Middle English word ferry, implying a church festival, or the Celtic fyr, meaning a holiday or fair. However, its seasonal setting suggests the dance may once have been a pagan spring festival. The ceremony that precedes the furry dance is probably more significant than the dance. It is a true relic of the ancient May Games, designed to greet the summer with a song and drama to induce crop fertility. Known as the Halantau, this mumming play features older children. Garlanded and carrying branches of sycamore, they sing an ancient song, part of the chorus of which runs, "Welcome is the summer and the May-o, for summer is a coming-o, and winter is a gone-o." We cannot cover all the wonderful scenery and ancient tales that abound within the borders of Cornwall, but we cannot leave without a visit or tale from Mosul. That's how it's pronounced, but the spelling looks like mousehole. In 1595, a fleet of Spanish ships appeared and burnt the village of Mosul to the ground. Only the Cegwyn Arms, now a private house, survived. Near the quay is a stone called Merlin's Rock, and the Spanish attack was regarded locally as the fulfilment of a prophecy by the wizard. A saying still current and in the district is, "There shall land on the rock of Merlin those who shall burn Paul, Penzance and Newlyn." Merlin's other prophecies have still to be fulfilled. He said, for instance, that when the Rainhead and Dodman meet, man and women will have cause to greet. The two headlands remain 40 miles apart. We have a salutary lesson in a story from Penhale. According to legend, Penhale Sands was once the site of Langerock, a beautiful town with 7 fine churches. Mining made the town rich, but with wealth came a sad moral decline. So evil were its ways that one night a storm arose and buried the town and all its people beneath a sand dune. Even now, says the legend, when the storm is nigh, when the night is stormy, the bells of the 7 churches can be heard above the roar of the sea. There may be some truth in the story, for after high winds ancient human skeletons have sometimes been discovered there. About 100 years ago a small 7th century oratory was discovered beneath the sands at nearby Perranzabulo when restored. This name in Old Cornish means the church in St Piran in the Sands, and the oratory is believed to mark the spot where St Piran landed from Ireland. Having seen this wild and lovely land in Cornwall, it remains a firm holiday favourite amongst the more discerning of the English, because although the countryside and coastline is one of a kind, the weather still remains staunchly British. However, it used to be the one place that has grown palm trees and plants for many years before they became nationally popular. We cannot leave this mystical place without a visit to St Buryan. The church, despite its granite dourness, provides a moment of humour. In folklore, lawyers are generally portrayed as dishonest. A churchyard epitaph mentions 2 exceptions. "Here lie John and Richard Ben, 2 lawyers and 2 honest men. God works miracles now and then." My thanks to the Reader's Digest for some inputs and personal journeys for the rest. There is a lot left out, but the one suggestion is to go there yourself and you'll find yourself many years back in history. In short, when it was a joy to be English in England. And finally, I'm so sorry. I'm about to tell an un-PC joke and it will offend everyone, so that's okay. I got it in this morning and I'm afraid I just thought of my listeners when I read it. Police warning, keys. Be on your guard. Just had a warning from police about keys. We're being warned that about 4 keys can open 87% of cars and 99% of houses. This is not a joke. The keys you will need to be on the lookout for are darkies, parkies, pie keys and junkies. My apologies to all 4 groups, of course. Sorry. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe